Good afternoon from the studio here in Helsinki, and welcome to celebrate this occasion of Nefco's 30 years in green financing. Today's event is titled Ready to Risk for Green, and Nefco is the Nordic green bank that invests in small and medium-sized green projects. My name is Anu Partanen, and I will be moderating the event today. First, a few words to the audience. You can find the program for today in the purple bar next to the streaming window. If you can't see it and you're in a full screen mode, you can click out of the full screen mode and then you will see the purple bar. If you want to join in the conversation during the event, you can send in questions and comments via chat box. And that box you can find by clicking on the tiny little Q&A button that's at the top of that purple bar. Once you type in comments, others can see them, and I will also be able to see them here in my iPad, and I will bring them to our speakers today. This is an anniversary event, but we're not going to be talking about the past, but the future. Today, the need to go green is greater than ever. And so we're going to spend time today talking about the status where we are now, what should be done, and how we can accelerate the green transition together. I will now invite to this virtual stage our first speaker, Paula Lehtomäki, to say the welcoming words. Her Excellency Paula Lehtomäki is Secretary General of Nordic Council of Ministers since 2019. She has an excellent overview of the Nordic Vision 2030, which was defined by the Nordic Prime Ministers in 2019. And she can certainly tell us how this Nordic vision can be put into action. She can also see the opportunities the Nordic region has to drive the change towards a green transition and hopefully create a butterfly effect. Welcome, Paula Lehtomäki, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Anu. Ladies and gentlemen, some 10-15 years ago, I served as an environment minister and often had to answer to a question: can an environmentally friendly business be profitable as well? That was then. Now, most of us think that the only way business even can exist is to be sustainable. That time, around 10 years ago, there were still some doubts and uncertainties in the business society on the long-term goals on climate policy. Today, we know that there is a goal, and it is called carbon neutrality. So we have come a long way, and we have done it fast. And yet, it is not enough. Green and inclusive transition touches every sphere of the society. Ecological crisis combined with the technological revolution requires systemic change, and time is scarce. In front of these challenges, we stand together, launching Nordic butterfly effects and risking for green. The Nordic Council of Ministers and Nefco were both established to be platforms for cooperation, tools for solving problems. In a complex set of problems, the toolkit must be used efficiently and consistently towards a common goal. The Nordic Prime Ministers have adopted a vision for all of us, which states that the Nordic region is to become the most sustainable and integrated region in the world by 2030. It is an ambitious vision, and it is clear. It sets the focus on green, competitive, and socially sustainable, integrated Nordic region. This is also a good track for Nefco. Nefco has, for the last 30 years, been financing thousands of projects to accelerate the green transition, both in the Nordic region, but also in many other places. Your activities are an important reminder that we cannot achieve green transition in a vacuum. It needs to transition, and we shall collaborate in this effort. Although the Nordic region is small, we can and need to contribute significantly to speed up the green transition. Therefore, we need so-called butterfly effects, initiatives that start in one place and then cause effects elsewhere in the world. We need initiatives for change that are scaled up and make a difference. One concrete example of such a butterfly effect is the Swedish baseload, a cost-efficient small-scale technology that utilizes low-temperature waste and geothermal to generate electricity. After initial grant from NOPEF and following loan from Nefco, the technology is now used by power companies in Iceland, Japan, Taiwan, and the US. Another example of collaboration is the Programme for Environment and Climate Cooperation. The program aims to contribute to an improved status of the environment and climate in northwest Russia. It is a concrete example of an intervention that leads to a butterfly effect. The energy sector is a sector with many interlinkages and need for close cooperation to put us on a pathway towards net zero emissions. We welcome the fact that the energy sector is clearly defined priority in the newly adopted Nefco strategy for the coming years. Nefco has a long and successful track record of working with different forms of energy efficiency and emission reducing actions in the past 30 years. This background gives a good potential for successful work in this area in the future as well. Ladies and gentlemen, the Nordic countries, with their very ambitious climate goals, are among the leaders of the world. It is the right place to be. But our capabilities must be harnessed for common good, for solutions on the global scale. We need to join forces in this work. Within the Nordic cooperation, we still have potential to be more efficient to achieve our common goals by working even closer together. Here, Nefco continues to play an important role as a member of a Nordic family. But life is not only about solving problems. It is also about paying tribute to good achievements and even celebrating when there is an occasion. I think we all would have wanted to be today in Helsinki celebrating the ambitious and successful work of Nefco during the last 30 years and wishing the institution all the best in the coming years. Instead, we celebrate virtually, but wholeheartedly. With these words, I would like to congratulate Nefco, its workers and collaboration partners on this important event. I wish you all a great day of constructive and fruitful discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. Can I follow up very briefly? So everybody is looking to be green today. Do you think there's something special about the Nordics that stands out, or how could the Nordics stand out in this global effort to become more green?
Yes, I think that it's important to lead by example, and the Nordics can show that it is possible. It is possible to do it. We have already managed to decouple the emissions from economic growth. So now we need to go on other areas of sustainability. So in that sense, we have good potential. And as I mentioned also in the speech, we have very much potential to create concrete solutions to different environmental challenges and scale them up globally.
Thank you so much, Paula, for being with us today. Now we will move on to meet some significant change agents who are looking at the need for transition from different perspectives. First, we have a man whose background is not the most conventional one. He's a psychologist, he's an economist, he has also co-founded a clean tech company, and he has written 2 books. What we think about when we try not to think about global warming, and more recently, Tomorrow's Economy, which came out this spring. With his cross-scientific background, he's now taking the pulse on the green transformation. Is it healthy or is it manic? Welcome, Per Espen Stoknes. The stage is yours.
Thanks so much. Pleasure being with you, and look forward to continuing this conversation over the day. So thanks. I see the slides coming up next. So as you mentioned, my previous book was on the psychology of climate, and a TED talk I gave now has more than 3 million views on this. I presented in it the psychology of green and sustainability. And this week I'm launching the follow-up book called Tomorrow's Economy, which is more constructive, not so much on the psychological problems, but more on the solutions. And that's where I'm going to speak today. What we've seen over the last 10 to 12 years is kind of apocalypse fatigue, a lot of on the climate issue, particularly after the Great Recession of 2009. In the TED Talk, I presented this evidence-based model of the 5 inner barriers that we have in our heads that stop climate action when we hear when we hear climate news coming straight at us. So in it, I explained how many develop a kind of apocalypse fatigue from too much distancing, too much doom, a dissonance feeling, and an unconscious denial. I cannot repeat all that there, but the main point is that these defenses were particularly hard at work after the previous financial crisis. Just look at these numbers. Next. In 2009, the failed Copenhagen Conference on Financial Crisis crushed European climate concern attitudes. This is, how serious of a problem do you think global warming, climate change is at this moment in different countries? And that in 2008, we had the previous wave, and then it went down. And I wrote my book in 2006 and a TED Talk in 2017. So what has happened since? What's different now? And in 2018, we saw a new wave. Can you, next? This is the rise for Fridays for Future with Greta Thunberg, etc., driven on by the worst climate news ever. In many ways, these were messages of despair and anger from the next generation, but they were very weak on the story of how we, humanity, and our economy can solve the climate problem. Next. So in a famous speech to the UN, Greta was clear that ecosystems are dying, but all you can speak about are fairy tales of eternal economic growth. The problem for many, particularly environmentalists and climate scientists, next, is that they have this very clear idea that we cannot have eternal growth on a limited planet. And I hear it all the time when I speak about the green economics. So how can we redefine growth? And how can we understand these limits? So where are we now? Let's take a step back. Next. At this moment in 2021, we've been through about 250 years of innovation waves. In 1700, it was the first wave with mechanization. Then came a wave of steel and rail innovation. This was the time of the Rockefellers and the Carnegies and JP Morgan. Then after a while came the next great innovation wave. They're often called Kondratiev waves after Schumpeter's book on the creative destruction. So Henry Ford with the assembly line, along with electricity, made mass consumption possible. Then the fourth wave came after the Second World War with the transistor, and it changed the economy again. Now with communications through TV, aviation, and computers. And you all know, of course, that since the 1990s, we had this wave of internet. And now with the 5 biggest companies in the world are all from the 5th revolution: Amazon, Microsoft, Facebook, etc. Now, however, we're in for a different type of deep innovation wave, where the economy again will reconfigure itself. And this is what the 6th wave is about, a new type of innovation and investment, which focuses on the resource productivity driven by renewables and circular material flows. So let's define this. It has to do with the speed of a new type of growth. Next. In an article with Johan Rockström, I've defined green growth as an increase of those economic activities that give a lower environmental impact. So the resource productivity here is quicker than the rate of growth. But grey growth is what we know best. We've had that for the last 50 years. Its productivity increase with the total environmental footprint grows in spite of higher efficiency. In other words, growth eats up resource productivity. So the resource productivity is slower than the rate of growth. Rather than stop economic growth, we need to give it a new direction, to redefine, reframe it, and reshape it into something more healthy. That's what we can do with the Green Growth Compass. Next. So as I said, for the last 50 years, we've followed this red line where we increase the value creation, but we also increase the footprint. Now we need to shift that red arrow over to the white in 90 degrees. So what Greta Thunberg and many deep greens are fully correct in is the impossibility of further grey growth, the kind of growth that increases the footprint. But now there are a number of drivers shifting the economy to a new type of growth. But why should it happen sharply just now? In order to understand this, whether to see it's healthy, we need to look at the deeper drivers. Next. So one driver is what I could call the stick. And the stick is climate risk has become financial risk. I'm sure all of the listeners are aware of this, but also the largest investors such as BlackRock are now gradually pushing this upwards. Not consistently, but they've started. And for many CEOs and other investors, it's a threat, particularly when it comes along with the EU taxonomy. In addition to the stick, we need the carrot. Next. And the carrot is that due to a number of reasons, sustainable companies are more profitable than conventional companies. This used to be, as the first lecturer mentioned, not something quite trustworthy 10 years ago. But now more than 2,200 research studies show, according to this review, that 63% of them confirm it. Yes, sustainable companies are more profitable. Only 8 to 9% say no. And then the 1/3 says it really depends a little bit on how you define sustainability and the weighting of the E versus the S versus the G. Next. If, for instance, in 2012, you put the money on the top AAA ESG-rated shares, 6 years later, you would have 50% more than if you put them in the bottom ESG shares. This is where the carrot is. Next. Also, in the last 2 years, we've seen an incredible acceleration of this. So this index here shows how green growth shares are doing. And over the last 2 years, as you can see, the upper green line, the dark green one, has outcompeted even the other tech companies or the growth shares. You can see there's been some sell-off over the last couple of months. However, this is not least due to the higher long-term interest rates, which tend to favor value shares over growth shares. But it's not a big crash yet, at least. Next. So how will these ESG and green growth shares perform into the future? It's clear that the long-term investors putting their money into ESG funds have doubled this by a factor of 10 just over the last 2 years. As you can see from this, the flow into the sustainability funds are now more than like 25% of all overall flows into stocks and bonds, while a few years ago they struggled to get above the 1%. So is this a healthy trend, or is it just a manic episode that will recede as we go into the 2020s? Next. In order to answer that, we need to look at how these big innovation waves actually work. And I follow here Carlota Perez's study on the technological revolutions. She says for each of the 5 previous ones, we've had this period that there is an eruption after the big previous wave has stalled. Then there is gradually a frenzy and going into a chaos period where everybody wants to put in IPOs and new shares and investments in there, and it goes through the roof. And then, of course, there's a collapse with a recession, the turning point. And after that, the synergies come out among the most solid companies, and then it moves towards maturity over the next 10 to 20 years. Next. Now, why is this wave growing, and why is it a healthy wave and not just manic? And there are 7 deep drivers that I will mention for you right now. It is first the rapid fall in renewables of costs. Then, as I mentioned, ESG investing is suddenly for real. Then material flows go digital and circular. Fourth, it's now a huge financial climate risk that is reconfiguring investment portfolios and their understanding of risk, the TCFD. Then you have the SDGs and the Paris Agreement, which is a major thing. We've had it for 5 years, and it's actually humanity's first common shared plan ever. Then we have what I call the G3s, which is China, EU, and the USA. All that have now net zero goals, investing in green and the circular. Each are shaping their own types of green deals. And finally, on the 7th point, COVID has resurrected the active government and finally killed off this neoliberal fantasy that we should have a minimalist government that should not interfere in the markets, but just have laissez-faire, or let the market do what they want. Last slide. So conclusions. Our problem isn't really growth, it's our old type of growth with an incredible resource wastefulness. Also, there's a wave now where the new type of investments and innovations are accelerating, shifting from labor productivity to resource productivity. Third, increasingly we see both research and investors recognizing that green is the new black. And finally, fourth, the 6th wave is growing. It's deep, it's an accelerating shift, but the exact timing is unfortunately unknown. So when will the next big crack come? I don't know, but it will come, and then the synergy will start after that. Thank you.
Thank you, Per. If you have any questions for Per, please type them in the Q&A, click on the Q&A button and type them in the chat box, and I will get them here. We won't take them right now, you have a moment to type them. We will go through a couple of keynote speakers, and then we'll have them all here on stage in a shared panel, and then I will bring your questions. But keep sending them, and we will have them ready then. Now we will move on to our next speaker, and we're going to talk about the EU Green Deal. The EU Green Deal, of course, is an integral part of the European strategy to implement the Agenda 2030 and the Common Sustainable Development Goals. A significant part of the EU Green Deal is about pursuing green finance and investment, including from the private sector, and developing standardized accounting practices and improved climate and environmental data disclosure. Our next guest speaker, Thomas Verrey, comes from the Directorate General of Environment at the European Commission, and he has been strongly involved in the strategic work advising on actions necessary for greening the financial system and the economy. So let's hear more about the EU Agenda for Green Financing. Welcome, Thomas. The stage is yours now.
Good afternoon, Anu. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me. Congratulations with your birthday, and thank you also very much to the previous speakers for already energizing the debate. Very, very interesting material, and I hope what I will say will complement what was said before. As you said, I have about 10 minutes to introduce you and your audience to the Green Deal, which is quite a challenge. So I'll talk about why we need it. I'll give a very brief overview and then probably zoom in on 1 or 2 topics that are relevant for today's event and Nefco in particular. Next, please. I always like to start from the World Economic Forum's global risk reports, and that already starts linking with the previous speaker, where we have seen for many years that environmental degradation applies to natural capital at large, climate, not only climate, by the way, but also biodiversity, water, and other related issues, and they feature among the top 10 most likely and most impactful elements that could jeopardize our business continuity and social cohesion. So I think what is new, I'm around about 25 years working in environment, and we've seen the green wave going up and down, but now it's really there. And one of the reasons is that I think there's an increasing understanding that on a planet with 10 billion people, these things are going to affect business continuity. Will I still have water to produce concrete, yes or no, rather than merely affecting competitiveness? And we've had many different ways of presenting that, the planetary boundaries, the wedding cake, SDG, and all the rest of it. The problem, however, is that these messages are not really trickling through in the boardrooms as we speak today. So next slide. One example for that is that if you really look and contrast the big interest, rightfully so, in green with the reality on the ground, then it's hard to basically put green investments anywhere higher than 2% of the market volumes in general. Again, an example of JP Morgan that was studying everything which was ESG, so environmental, social, and governance related, and they had a very hard time to put that volume at 2%. And mind you, that's not only green, that's also including good governance and social, which is also on the rise. So again, that is not necessarily problematic, except that we promised implicitly in our policies combined a fully sustainable world by around about 2050. So you connect 2% and 100% over time, and you're starting to look at a fairly daunting and challenging timeline. But okay, that is possible to overcome with what we have on the plate. What I always like to say is, let's also not forget to not only focus on growing the 2%, is what we do with all the labeling, classification, and all the other tools, including the taxonomy, but let us also find a way to mobilize and convert the 98% of the economy that we cannot affirmatively call green, but is very gray. And that links very much to what the previous speaker was saying. We need to convert the gray into green, and we need tools to do that. I mean, the World Bank and others have been looking at what are the main obstacles for greening the economy and finance in general, and they found that a poor understanding of environmental risks generally is certainly a top obstacle, linked with the fact that we lack generally accepted methods and metrics for measuring and valuing environmental risks. So next. In order to basically mainstream our environmental policy messages, I think we need a much simpler environmental agenda that can be understood by a much broader audience, including journalists and in particular economic decision makers. And what I usually advocate is count to 5. So instead of pursuing or environmental issues topic by topic, we need to look at them in a coherent framework. And then we should always think about air, number 1, water, land and biodiversity, or a chair that needs 4 legs to stand stable, and the sun. And then that sum is what is mirroring our economic activity. And we talked about growth before and all the rest of it. And we need to start looking much more forward. So we not only need to look at what is green or not green, but what is your footprint and where do you need to be sustainable. And that's a complementary logic that I think we can easily introduce to mobilize a much bigger group than we have been able to mobilize today. Next slide, please. So that is exactly where the Green Deal that was basically launched by the new European Commission under President von der Leyen in December 19 came in as such a welcome and very unique policy instrument for many reasons, but not least, it was maintaining the European climate ambition, even strengthening it. And again, long-termism is so important in tackling environmental policy. Secondly, it brought other natural capital components that we talked about, air, water, land, and biodiversity on par with climate, because again, if you don't tackle them simultaneously, you're at risk of shifting risks rather than mitigating them. We saw that with the diesel crisis, and biodiversity is another concern, and we have several others. And then finally, the Green Deal basically brought the sustainable finance topic center stage, where it was something that emerged after the financial crisis before. So we have really now a political landscape that allows us to go for a much more systemic tackling of the environmental challenges, and that is absolutely needed and essential to make that transition real going forward. Next, I'm going to zoom in on one particular issue. Next slide, please. On one particular issue that you already mentioned, Anu, because I do think that natural capital accounting is certainly a potential game changer here. Natural capital accounting is a practice that emerged from businesses around about 2010, 2012. First Puma, Truecost, and then Caring, PwC, and many others in the meantime. BASF, Novartis, all grouped these days in the Value Balancing Alliance, supported by the Capitals Coalition, World Business Council, etc. And it basically is a technique that is mainly operated for informing the internal decision making of companies, not so much the external disclosure and reporting, where the bulk of the activity and focus is these days, rightfully so. But if we don't act also on the internal management side, we're going to end up with empty reports. So here you see an example of a matrix that basically implements this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 topic that I mentioned before. Air pollution, greenhouse gases, land use, waste, water consumption, use, and biodiversity is still implicitly embedded in the other topics. We should make it more and more explicit. But you see the footprint of a holding company, the Caring company, over the supply chain. So in the columns, you see not only the topics, but you see the footprint over the warehouses, the offices, the shops, all the way down to agriculture harvesting. And what you see here, for example, is that climate indeed is a cross-cutting concern throughout the supply chains, the second line. But if you would zoom in, and I know it's a bit hard to read, this represents roughly 35% of your overall footprint, i.e. your risk. So by focusing only on climate, which we've done for some time, and now countered by the Green Deal, which is what makes me fairly happy, we're at risk of providing bad advice. We're at risk of saying, companies, you focus on 35% of your risk. And we cannot prejudge at what share of the risk climate is. So here we look at a much more holistic way, and we say, look also at the other elements. So sometimes it is said that it's difficult to measure climate, and environment as a whole, and climate is more simple. I agree with the simpler, but I disagree with the fact that it's not possible to measure climate as a whole, including climate. We're not doing internal competition. Once you have that, you can also start measuring and monitoring in a forward-looking way, which is becoming much more relevant. The past is becoming irrelevant on a planet with 10 billion people grappling for the same resources. So that's where I don't recall the exact wording, but Per was saying we need to move towards a different type of economy and growth. I wouldn't make that a fetish. I mean, we just need to reduce our footprint, and then we see how that works best. Next, please. If you set out a footprint, again, on the base of your new environmental management system on the map, then you see, for example, where the footprint of a Paris-based holding company sits. So that is information that would give you a whole different set of insights and different actions. So it is clear that with most companies operating through international value or even supply or value chains, that we can much more easily adopt a global approach, and should actually do that. I mean, whether we talk about the G3 or others, we have the multinationals must become part of the solution in one way or the other. And again, we shouldn't be naive, but there is a way to bring them on board. Next, please. So finally, on the next slide, the final point on accounting is, can we have the next, please? We're working in the Commission. We've launched actions at the corporate level. We have a transparent project. At government level, you will recall maybe that there was recently the system of economic environmental accounts adopted at UN level, moving it into a standard, so quite a landmark approach as well, also building on the natural capital logic. We have one on project level, so InvestEU, which I'll talk about in a second, has in its Article 8 the obligation for large infrastructure projects to now produce environmental accounts in accordance with the natural capital, air, water, land, biodiversity, and make them public. And then all, of course, is linked to product life cycle assessment and all the rest of it. All is linked to and complementary to all work. And we mentioned the taxonomy, benchmarking, green bonds, and all the rest of it. No time to elaborate right now. And my last slide, and I apologize for rushing through. My last slide, please. Again, most relevant for Nefco in particular, is I'm zooming in on InvestEU, which is a 26 billion new EU investment instrument that basically deals with everything but grants, equity, debt, and guarantees. And that is delivered through 4 windows on research and innovation, SME, the core business of Nefco, but also sustainable infrastructure and social impact operations. And there we're working on really strengthening the Green Advisory Center of Excellence, because again, money is not the issue. There is plenty of willing money to go green, but we lack solid pipeline, and we really need to do more work on that. And we will do that through rosters and all the rest of it, which we can elaborate on later on if time permitting, all with the purpose of looking at establishing a 10 billion natural capital and circular economy portfolio, clustering various initiatives in the market. It's a bit short and frantic, but I hope that sets the scene for an interesting debate later on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thomas. And again, if you have questions or comments for Thomas, please click on the Q&A button that's at the top of the agenda in the purple bar, and we'll bring them to Thomas later when he returns. And now we will hear our third keynote discussion. And we're going to look at what does it take to really become more sustainable, and how should Nordic leaders and businesses drive the change. We're going to invite to the stage Halla Tómasdóttir from Iceland. She was the first female CEO of the Iceland Chamber of Commerce, and she had a vision to incorporate feminine values into finance. In 2016, she was also an independent candidate for the president of Iceland. Now she works together with a group of courageous business and civil society leaders to transform business for a better world. And I'd also like to welcome to the stage Nefco's Managing Director, Trond Moe. And Trond is going to take from here and discuss this topic with Halla. Welcome, Trond and Halla.
Thank you, Anna. And hello, Halla. How are you?
Hello, Trond, and happy anniversary. I'm good. How about yourself?
Great, thank you. I wish we could have been together, but it's great that you are here from Reykjavik while we are here in Helsinki. So let me jump right into it. As the CEO of the B team, you work with global leaders committed to business being a force for good. How do you see the current context with the pandemic and everything we're going through now? What are the challenges we are facing, and how can we also see some opportunities?
Yes, thank you, Trond. It's a time like no other. And there's no exaggeration when I say that I don't know that we will have a moment like this again in our lifetimes. Plenty of pain, plenty of challenges. COVID has led to suffering, economic difficulties, and still is going to lead to even more of that. But it came on the top of a climate crisis, a crisis in our natural systems, a crisis of inequality, and even a crisis in trust. So I'd say we're in the perfect storm. It's a convergence of crisis, and there is absolutely no going back to business as usual on the back of all that has happened to us as humanity over a long period of time. But the last year I like to look at as an awakening. And I don't think there is a human being that hasn't been touched or transformed. Many, unfortunately, for the worse, but many for the better. Meaning that I think we're now awake and we know that we can't continue to do business the way we've been doing it. We can't continue to invest in the gray economy. We can't continue to put humanity to the sideline in the way we practice business and lead our companies. So we like to call it on the B team that it's the gift of this is that we now know we need to reset. We need to reset and introduce new models, new metrics, or accelerate the ones that exist and harmonize them. We need to think about new models of leading, new models of investing, new models of running business and running our economy so that we can drive shared prosperity on a healthy planet. And our rallying call on the B team is really that we have no time to waste. It's time to get 10 times bolder than we ever have been in terms of innovating. And if we've learned one thing from the last year, we know we can innovate fast. But the question is, will we use that lesson to tackle climate, to tackle the collapse in nature that is already happening, and to tackle that unsustainable inequality crisis that we're facing the world over?
Wow, that's really interesting. If you go a little bit more specific into the financial sector, what do you think the role is of that sector, and specifically Nordic businesses and investors, in leading a just and inclusive green transition?
Yeah, let me start at home with the Nordics. I have long been convinced, and I think we have plenty of evidence to say that the Nordics is a region like no other when it comes to leading towards tackling the two crises the world is facing, the two twin crises of climate and nature and inequality. Because we tend to be the most equal countries and egalitarian countries in the world, and we have some of the best sustainability solutions. We also have a young demographic, relatively speaking. We are agile and small, and it's good to be a speedboat when you're innovating, and we can be a speedboat, and we have great social cohesion, comparatively speaking. We're not facing the incredible divisiveness that we see in many other countries around the world right now. So in my opinion, we are the best set region to pilot what the green economy looks like. And we should, and indeed must, accept our accountability in this world to do so. And the way I see it, we should show the way in this fast growing movement around ESG, or call it SDG or global goals lens, and take that into all of our practices in finance at a 10 times bolder scale than we have. And this is a decade about courage, this decade ahead. We need to be bold, but we also need to hold our feet to the fire. So accountability mechanisms are critical, as Thomas spoke about just before me. We need businesses to think about transparency as a way to build trust in business and in society. And we need measures that matter. And right now, we are still, by and large, in the financial sector, valuing financial profit for the short term and thinking about the purpose of business as being maximization of shareholder wealth. And I think it's time to declare the end of the Friedman era, that doctrine that introduced maximizing of shareholder wealth as the only purpose of business, and see it as the purpose of business to solve problems, and profit comes from that. And we certainly have problems to tackle today, plenty of them, and no business or investor should be free of accountability towards doing whatever they possibly can to tackle this incredible time in human history.
Great, but as a follow-up question, that doesn't mean that we have to give up profit, does it? Isn't it so that doing the right thing is also profitable?
It's completely a false dichotomy that it is profit or purpose. We actually should achieve profits through meaningful and compelling purpose. And all of us have a role, individuals, companies, governments, countries. We all need to step it up and become 10 times bolder. I have a personal philosophy or a personal frame for ESG that maybe I can introduce, because I think one of the difficulties we're facing right now, it's a bit of a jungle out there of metrics. If you think about it, we have all kinds of versions of ESG, and we have the natural capital, and all of this matters. Both business needs to know and have management tools on how to measure its impacts, and investors also need to be able to value risk and compare things. But in my opinion, this needs to become two sides of the same coin, meaning what business transparently measures and discloses, and in particular discloses future forward goals around, needs to be the same things that we are actually measuring our impact on. And so let me give you my ESG definition, just as a philosophy. I think ultimately we need great ambition, and we need great harmonization of metrics in order to normalize this. But I believe there are two biggest crises are the crisis of climate and environment, and the social crisis, or the crisis of inequality and a broken social contract. And so I like to define the ESG, I often call it ESG cubed, and I talk about three legs under the E. We have to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. No business can be excused from that great challenge, but we also have to invest in natural-based solutions. That is at least a third of the solution, and that has to be, nature and climate have to be incorporated. And third, we need circularity like never before. Under the S, I also see three pillars. We need to think about human rights, and maybe human rights due diligence becoming the business norm, so that we embrace our global full supply chain value system responsibility here. We need to drive diversity and inclusion, because we cannot change how we lead and do business with more of the same around every table, be it the investment table or the global governance bodies. And number 3, we have to start talking about shared prosperity as a metric that we measure and look at, because the escalating gaps between those who have and those who are enjoying prosperity and those who do not is just unsustainable for all of us. And there is no business on a broken planet with a broken social contract. And so that takes me to the G. I also have 3 things under the G that we need to be thinking about. And I see the G as levers to help us tackle these 2 big crises that are facing us. First G is generation. If we're not taking a generational lens to how we look at this moment, we are failing our children and grandchildren in massive ways. And I really see a lot of companies that are doing the bravest things out there. They're talking to the next generation in much more powerful ways, bringing them to the boardroom, bringing them into sustainability councils, etc. This helps us to go from the short-term horizon we're so stuck in this economic model to more of a long-term lens, which is what leadership is all about. The second lens to me is gender balance and inclusion. I have seen, and we in the Nordic know this, that when we have greater gender balance in decision making and dialogue, in who is shaping how we lead and run our economy and our societies, we make better decisions. The dynamics are better, the results are greater. So if we want green growth, if we want inclusive growth, which is the objective of Europe and should be the objective for the whole world, we need to change who's around the table. And last but not least, the third leg of G to me is our idea about governance. We need to go beyond governing for shareholders, and we need to really embed stakeholder governance as the new way to lead. And I think investors need to be asking for these things, because money makes the world go around, and investors have outsized accountability to make this happen.
Thank you. Let's end this on a personal note. You mentioned that we have to all to become 10 times more bolder. How can we as leaders actually become 10 times bolder?
Yeah, ultimately changing the world starts at home, doesn't it? We have to do the work to unlock leadership in ourselves and others in order to create this world that we want. And it is so easy for people everywhere to point out the window and say, government should be doing that, finance should be doing that, business should be doing that. But ultimately, making this happen comes down to each and every one of us playing our part. And I don't see leadership as given to the few. I believe there's a leader inside of every single one of us, whether we are a citizen running a small business or running a global corporations. We're humans at the end of the day, and we all want shared prosperity on a healthy planet. I've yet to meet a person that doesn't agree with that ultimate goal. So I have 5 critical steps that I would like to leave with you, because I think we need to call everybody off the sidelines and into creating this green growth and this green and inclusive future we want. First, I believe we all need to have our own compass. We need to basically outline what is our own purpose in this life. What are we here to do? And what are the principles that are going to guide us? Our organization should have a compass like this, but we as individuals should too. And I think there's nothing that unlocks more motivation, inspiration, courage, or resilience, all of it we need a lot of, than knowing our moral compass. And a note to self, it doesn't sit in our heads, it sits in our hearts. We need to really get clear on what we really care about as human beings. Number 2, and this is a message very much for the Nordic region and a message I've had to struggle with myself, is we need to befriend our imposter. Too many of us sit on the sidelines and ask, who am I to do this or that about the problems I see, or about the dissatisfaction I have over the state of the world? And I certainly had that when I was asked to run for president. I asked, who am I to run for president? It took me months to get to a better question, which really is, who am I not to raise my voice and values for something I care about? So I think it's important for us Nordics to overcome this typical syndrome of sometimes called the imposter syndrome, to think that we don't have a role in the wider global world. We do, and we have a very important one, and we can show the way. A lot of people look to us to do it, and we should raise our voices and values and be 10 times bolder about it. Number 3, we need to embrace future fit characteristics and mindsets. The characteristics that we are uplifting a lot on the B team now is the need for courage, to be 10 times bolder, but courage without humility isn't going to bring others along. So we have that gift naturally almost in the Nordics to be more humble than many other, typically. And although we see exceptions from that everywhere, we also need to unlock our humanity. This era of leadership is about empathy, compassion, caring about people, about our planet. And last but not least, this is the decade of accountability. So I think those are sort of 4 characteristics we should all be thinking about how we're putting to play. The mindset that I think is the most critical one is to move away from the know-it-all or the knower mindset into learn it all and be willing to think again. Because most of what we've learned and are still being taught is outdated. We're still learning finance only based on financial profit modeling. We're still learning very limited skill sets and mindsets for what is relevant now. Very quickly, 4th, we need radical collaboration. This is not the task of a single company, single country, or just the government, or just the private sector or civil society. It's radical collaboration time. We all need to come together. And last but not least, and I really want to leave you with that thought, is we have to change who to change how. We cannot continue to have sameness around every design table, every decision-making table, all the global governance tables, and that's still the fact. We have 95% of the CEOs in the world are men. We still don't have gender balance or inclusion in the boardrooms, and that's partly why the boardrooms are not putting ESG on the agenda at the speed and scale that we need it. So we need to change who to change how, but changing who to change how is also to change ourselves. We cannot be the leaders this moment, unprecedented moment calls for unless we do the inner work. We can't change the world unless we change ourselves. So change you to change how is maybe my final message, and asking yourself questions like, who will you choose to be at this unprecedented moment in history that humanity is facing? What will you choose to do? How will you choose to serve? How can you be 10 times bolder and pursue in the future we want and frankly need?
Thank you, Hatla. This was truly inspirational. Back to you, Arno.
Thank you. So now Hatla will stay with us, and we will also invite Per and Thomas back. We have some 5 minutes for your audience questions with our panel. Thank you for sending in questions. We may not get to all of them, but we'll do our best. First question goes to Thomas. You said InvestEU does not provide grants. I like to think that grants can pave the way to develop green business. So would you agree that we need grants to develop and test concepts for green business in order to create good invest opportunities? In other words, we need initial investment without financial return to have more green impact. What do you say, Thomas?
Well, first correcting a misunderstanding. What I was saying is that InvestEU, which is 26 billion out of a total EU budget of 1.8 trillion, which is all grants, InvestEU is the financial instrument that delivers guarantees, including equity and that can be combined with grants. So I was not saying that in the sense that you can or should pursue only things on the commercial terms, although I think if you apply green structured finance in a much more smarter way, banking, for example, on the experience of Nefco and others, that we could do a whole lot more than purely non-commercial things. But again, what I was saying is that there is the InvestEU instrument that is about equity and debt instrument, which is what the bulk of the private sector is using. So it's an entry point into the private sector investment world, and it can be combined with green. So I hope that misunderstanding is clear. I was not advocating a solution that would exclude grant-based financing, but grants remain a very, very small tool in the overall financial market. So I think we need to be real and really engage with that private sector mechanisms, the innovation potential. And again, as all the speakers before me said, because I think I agree with all of them, of 99% of what they were saying, let's not get hooked onto this profit and non-profit thing. I mean, it's a risk return topic that we need to be much better in exploiting.
Per, if we're thinking that the real risk now for businesses is not going green, how can that be translated into how businesses view risks? Can we really change the way businesses view risks?
Yeah, I think the risk question is where this engagement starts. And what we see now is that CEOs can hardly, meet investors without being asked how they are doing their ESG reporting and what's their level of climate risk and have they done risk assessments in scenarios, etc. So again, as I mentioned in my talk, this is starting from the stick side. If you don't deal with that risk, you put the company at risk, and as such, investors threaten to withdraw. However, we need to move beyond risk into also opportunities. And I'm very happy that TCFD included the reporting on opportunities. And I also liked Thomas when he spoke about how we should have future targets also for the footprint and how we can view these footprints as both opportunities and also risk reduction. In my book, Tomorrow's Economy, I present a stairs model, a green growth stairs model, that start with these kind of somewhat defensive measures, better reporting, better monitoring, more efficiency of your buildings and your product. But then as you go up those stairs, you move into more boldness, and there I add on to Halla, 10 times more ambitious, speed up the green growth stairs towards more circular products with a net positive or regenerative impact, and finally a business model that becomes truly regenerative. In that way, we're integrating the opportunities for higher risk, opportunities for higher profits with reducing the risk, and also aiming to do that in a more inclusive way through collaboration with stakeholders and bringing more diversity, women, and a more broader picture into the boardroom, which also Thomas was pointing out hasn't happened quite yet.
Hatla, I have a question for you from the audience. So this is from Anna, who runs the Munasavn Arveiki tool library. And she says, we are in the process of changing it into an NGO, as there isn't a non-profit business style in Iceland. We are struggling in the past 3 years in raising capital to support our project. What direction do you think we will have to follow through as a society to reach what you mentioned in your presentation, transparency, sustainability, and aiming toward impact versus profit?
Well, first of all, I don't want to juxtaposition impact and profit. I think the future belongs to us finding the balance of doing both. And this is very much what the B team is founded around, as the notion that our purpose in business must be to see through the well-being of people, planet, and our economies. But I do think Iceland and all countries should introduce the non-profit models, the ones that don't have it, because I think the third or fourth sector, depending on how you look at it, play a very important role in society. Citizens need to have a way to work on these issues, and I run a non-profit today, but we're not all awake to that. I am also a huge believer in the benefit corporation movement, or the B Corp movement, which is sort of a sister organization to ours. And we saw a very recent example that I have to bring out here this week on Monday, where one of our B team companies, Danone, and its courageous and bold CEO that was doing all the right things, Emmanuel Faber, was under relentless pressure from investors after introducing a new business model called the Mission Company in France. And he ended up stepping aside because, in my opinion, of the short-termism of activist investors that, in the capacity of having only a few percentage shareholding behind them, were able to oust someone that was doing the right thing for the long term because of short-term performance during a very difficult time not being there. I uplift this example because it's not the first one. So at the end of the day, until we change our economic system to value long-term sustainable value creation for all stakeholders, we are never going to transform the world at the speed and scale we need, which is 10 times bolder. And that's my concern about the risk approach only to this transition, because that's only the first step in the ladder. I like how Per Espen describes it. We have to go from risk to opportunity. And at the end of the day, I think the highest step in the ladder for leaders is look inside of your heart. What do you care about as a human being? That's where moral leadership and your moral compass sits. I think that's where you need to go, whether you're running a nonprofit or a business that has different values. Find investors and people who share that moral compass. But until we scale that moral compass, we're in a race against the future for our children and grandchildren. And I think all of us will look back at this time and feel incredible satisfaction if we showed up for this moment with the 10 times bolder leadership it calls for. So keep going, keep onto your moral compass wherever you are, but know that we are functioning in a system that doesn't incentivize the things we need to see.
Thank you so much, Per, Thomas, and Hatla. We are now at a halfway point of our event. We will soon continue, but we can take just very brief half a minute to stretch our legs and grab a coffee. And while we're at it, let's do a little poll. We have audience from all around the world. So next to the Q&A button at the top of that same purple bar I keep talking about, you can now find a button that says tasks. If you click on that, a window opens and you can type in that box the city or the municipality you are located in right now, and then we can have a little word cloud and see where we all are at participating to this event. So please be back in just a moment, we'll continue, and meanwhile, please let us know where you are by clicking that tasks button on the agenda bar. The word cloud looks great. I'm so glad to hear that we really have people from all over the world. Thank you for participating, everyone, and typing in where you are. And we'll now move on to the second part of the day. In the second part of our event, we will look at the green transition from the ground up and in concrete terms through cases and companies. But let's first start with a glimpse into what this green bank Nefco is in fact all about.
Can we risk green growth? Many brilliant Nordic companies have trouble finding funds for growing. They have already passed the startup phase, yet they are too small for mainstream banks. Nefco, the Nordic Green Bank, is ready to take financial risks if there is a green upside. Risk is nothing new for Nefco. In 1990, the 5 Nordic countries took a risk when they founded an investment bank that finances only green projects. That bank, Nefco, became the world's first green bank. Nefco partners with the Nordic countries to turn their national commitments, such as the Nordic Vision, the EU Green Deal, and the Paris Agreement into reality. Over its 30 years, Nefco has helped more than 600 Nordic companies to globally expand their businesses and to make a difference. The average impact has been 80% less nutrient pollution in wastewater projects and 50% less CO2 emissions in energy efficiency projects. Nefco works broadly, from renewable energy and circular economy to conservation of biodiversity, from the Arctic all the way to Africa. For the Nordic countries, the real risk is to lose their competitive edge in the green transition. If we miss waves of new green technologies, we will miss the jobs they create. In a nutshell, Nefco scales up Nordic green solutions on international markets. Nefco is ready to risk for green. Nefco's task is to accelerate the green transition. May the future bring many more green businesses. Nefco, the Nordic Green Bank.
I now have here with me again Trond Moe, who joined Nefco in 2018 and has been managing director since 2019. Before joining Nefco, Trond spent more than 20 years of his career in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. Nefco has for a long time been financing and implementing green projects with a strong focus on Eastern Europe. A few years ago, Nefco's mandate was extended to also support the expansion of Nordic small and medium-sized enterprises on global markets outside the Nordics. Now Nefco has further developed its strategy to meet the needs of these innovative small and medium-sized enterprises that could make a difference in the green transition if they had the proper funding for growth. Welcome, Trond. The stage is yours.
Thank you very much. And let me dive a little bit into the strategy of Nefco for the future, as well as touching upon our great history as well. We are celebrating 30 years today, so we'll touch that and go into the future. So Nefco is really a true and original Nordic first. We were founded in 1990 by the 5 Nordic countries. And we are an exclusive green bank and have been since the founding, probably the first green bank in the world. So our new strategy, our updated strategy, we have called Ready to Risk for Green. Our task is to accelerate the green transition by financing the initial scale-up of Nordic green solutions globally. We are ready to take financial risk if there is a green upside. So as you will see, we say Nordic Green Solution scale up small companies. We are a bottom-up company, and we therefore do concrete projects all over the world. The framework we work in, and that we have talked a lot about today, so I'll not go much into this. We heard the EU Green Deal, the Nordic Vision, we heard from Paula. We have the Paris Agreement, the SDGs, and other international committees. These are the framework that we work within. And then we have the new EU taxonomy. That is a system of classifying sustainable investments that is not just now being developed. It's not completely developed yet, it's in a process. But we have chosen to use the principles of that system to classify what kind of projects we work in. So that means we work with climate projects, but we also do a holistic approach, just like we heard Thomas talk about. We work with water and marine resources, circular economy, pollution, and biodiversity and ecosystems. So that's an important part. We are a holistic green company. We do this by using risk capital. We mobilize risk capital for the green transition. And basically, we work in 3 different areas. The first one is where we manage various initiatives with public capital for Nordic countries and other international institutions. And these are tasks that we have done for a long time. Some are old, some are new. It ranges from a very important area for Nefco, which is the Arctic and Barents region and the whole Northwest Russia region, but also all the way to Africa, where we have a big assignment working on Beyond the Green renewable energy. Second, and you mentioned, Anu, that we have a long history in financing projects in Eastern Europe, and that is true, and we will continue to do that. We work a lot with municipal financing. We started out doing wastewater projects along the coast of the Baltic Sea to reduce pollution to the Baltic Sea. We have now focused a lot on energy efficiency, teaching how modern energy efficiency principles should be done, and we work with district heating projects in Ukraine, for example. And the third area is what we have talked about quite a bit already, global scale-up of Nordic SMEs. We have been doing this for some time on a test basis, but now we are launching full-scale funding for Nordic SMEs that want to scale up their green solutions or technologies on global market. For that, we use our own capital. We have our own capital that we are ready to risk, and we provide funding that is otherwise very difficult to get for these kind of companies. They may be too small, they may not have enough assets to put up securities that banks traditionally ask, but we can offer financing even without security. And we do take financial risk, but where we don't take risk is to analyze the environmental and climate solutions that they may work in. And these are the areas you see here on this taxonomy scale. We also attract funding from other private capital investors. Very often when we invest, other institutions or banks may even be interested in joining, because by our participation we have reduced the capital, and we can take a junior role to a bigger bank, for example, and we hope also in the future to attract a lot more funding from both private and capital markets to continue in this direction. So, to summarize, in short, we work to accelerate the green transition, and we do that in a bottom-up approach through small and medium-sized green projects. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Trond. And so for the next part, we will see 3 short videos that will all be presenting an example of a small or medium-sized company that Nefco has backed. After each video, we will have somebody related to the case to discuss it here with us. The first video comes from Finland, and the company is called Valo.
The use of solar energy to produce electricity and heat has been growing rapidly on a global scale over the last decade, and other fields of applications such as cooling and transportation are now becoming a possibility. The Finnish technology company Valo specializes in next-generation solar energy technology. It develops and produces more effective and environment-friendly, longer-lasting solar cells, panels, and photovoltaic systems close to the end user, adapted for various purposes. In spring 2020, Valo received a combined loan and equity financing from Nefco to complete and scale up the production capacity of the new manufacturing plant in Lithuania, which has produced more efficient double-sided solar cells since December 2020.
For solar energy to actually become part of the city, part of our life, it has to develop, it has to become flexible. The heart of our technology is completely different than most of the leading companies are doing. We can create flexible solar panels, even fabric-like appearances. So this gives us a lot of options which the traditional solar panel makers cannot achieve. Nefco came in very good time financing our IBC cell factory in Lithuania. I think it was one of the enablers of where we are today.
We now have with us Hannu Savisalo, Chairman of the Board of Valo. Welcome, Hannu. Hannu, Valo has a very interesting technology for creating flexible solar panels, which could significantly increase the implementation of solar power in various applications on global scale. What kind of potential are we talking about, and which geographical markets are you heading for now?
Well, the potential is, of course, in the whole solar world it's huge. As we know, the solar totally counts on 200 billion business, and it grows about 20 billion each year. So part of that is even a small part of that is huge number. we in Valo, we think that the electricity has to be produced where it's used. Like as an example, you can use some special panels just installed into your clothing. So it means that you really can charge your mobile phone when you are traveling in somewhere in sunshine. So it's a huge market. We are going to look at the VIPV, which is Vehicle Integrated PV. And as you know, BMW Model 3, it's 300,000 a year cars. So I would say it's a totally limitless market, new market, a limitless market all over the world.
And so what are the main challenges when a small company like Valo goes global?
I think the first thing is the attitude. You have to have a global view. If you look at the companies just concentrating to Finland, if we want to be in solar, of course we would like to look at the 200 billion market instead of 20-30 million market annually. That's what Finland is. It may be 100 in Scandinavia. So you have to look at the global. Then, of course, you have to have the capabilities, you have to have the human resources and money. Every single person sent somewhere a little bit further away from Finland costs $1 million a year.
So my next question was going to be about financing and money. Is it easy or difficult to find financing for the initial scale up on international markets?
I think for any startup, Savcor actually it's not, or Valo is not the startup. Savcor, the main owner, turns 40 years this year. But if you look at the real startup, so the first thing you have to have is think big. When we talk about green, it's a good opportunity to think big enough, make the opportunity, tell about the opportunities, try to convince the people who you are going to and asking for money that they don't concentrate in risk or history. You have to have you look at the opportunity, huge opportunity, and you have to go to the financiers who don't prefer the risk or risk valuation or everything else. Difficult, but it's worth doing that.
And so, as you mentioned, your first company was established already 40 years ago, so you have really been there and done that already. If you could say it in 3 words, what could other small and medium-sized businesses learn from your experiences?
At least entrepreneurship. So you need to be entrepreneur is typically it's a very curious. Entrepreneur is brave and good fighter. And entrepreneur normally thinks big. The entrepreneur sees the opportunity, not the risk. So find an entrepreneur as well and let them lead the company, look at the opportunities. As well for the financiers, so look at the entrepreneurs. Give them the seed money, let them work, and then challenge them to grow.
Thank you, Hannu. And so if you have questions for Hannu, just like in the first part of the day, we will have all of our speakers here on the second part of the day join us for a shared panel. So we will then take questions from the audience. So please keep the questions coming and I will then bring them to them once they return. And now let's take a look at our next case video presenting a company called Plastics.
Since 1950, approximately 8.3 billion tons of plastics have been produced globally, and 5 to 13 million tons of plastic waste seeps into our environment and oceans every year. The Danish cleantech mechanical recycling company Plastics is specializing in converting plastic fibers, primarily used fish nets, trawls and ropes that would previously have ended up in the ocean or landfill into high-quality and virgin-like green plastic raw materials. Plastics received a feasibility study grant from NOPEF, a fund financed by the Nordic Council of Ministers and managed by Nefco, to assess the South African market and, as a result, established a local subsidiary in 2017. Today, it obtains post-use discarded nets, trawls and other fishing gear from the South African market. Plastics is currently expanding its production capability in Denmark and simultaneously increasing its ability to recycle more process-intensive plastic waste.
Now, going circular means recognizing plastic waste as the resource it actually represents, to be used again and again. Businesses must be the engine driving this change through transparency and accountability. Our green plastics can be used in almost any product within any sector, from sports equipment such as kayaks, detergent bottles, furniture, watches, and cell phone covers. The NOPEF feasibility grant allowed Plastics to start our international development in South Africa, an important step towards our future growth and scale-up plan. This is why support through investments like this is crucial for a sustainable future.
We have now with us Peter Thesen, Director of International Market Policy at the Confederation of Danish Industry, a trade organization. Peter, Denmark is probably known to most of us for their strong wind power economy. On the video, we saw an example from a different sector, circular economy, which of course is very much high on the agenda of the green transition. In your role working for the Confederation of Danish Industry, you have seen a wide range of businesses. Has there been an increase in the share of green companies, and particularly those that are aiming for international markets?
Yes, definitely. We did get a new government in Denmark 2 years ago, and one of the first things the government did was to pass on a climate act, which actually was supported by a broad majority in the parliament, which is one of the most ambitious climate acts that we have seen globally. And the end target is to reduce Denmark's greenhouse gases emissions by 70% by 2030. It's a very ambitious goal, and I remember when I was speaking with my international or my European colleagues at that time, they actually expected DI as Denmark's largest business organization to, if not being against the plan, at least be skeptical, because such an ambitious climate goal would easily damage the competitiveness of Danish companies. That was at least what many of my colleagues expected. But as a matter of fact, we went in very fast and said that we was 100% behind this very ambitious goal. But of course, achieving such an ambitious goal requires a massive investment in research and new solutions that are yet to be identified. And therefore, we also launched a very comprehensive plan for how to achieve a reduction of 70%. And the very interesting thing here is that even though that we have more than 18,000 member companies, there was a massive support for us going out backing them up. And why is that the case? It's of course because the green transition is the future. This is what the Danish businesses are going to be the backbone of our business in the future. I can also add that we conducted a very large questionnaire survey very recently, where we asked 4,000 Danish companies, and 2 out of 3 were actually responding that sustainability was a key part of their business strategy. So the green transition is really a strong trend, maybe the strongest that I have ever seen, which is very much on the top of the mind in companies in Denmark, small as well as large companies.
So what role do you think small and medium-sized companies can play in the big picture?
Well, it's very interesting to study the figures, because we can see that if you look at the very small companies, I mean those that we call micro enterprises with less than 20 full-time employees, we can see that they are getting more and more international. If you measure the percentage of the export of that total annual turnover. So they are becoming more and more internationally, and we can also see that 20% of the large companies in Denmark today, they were actually small and medium-sized companies 3 years ago. So those that are successfully internationally, and it's a growing part of the Danish companies, they're getting successfully and they're growing. So therefore, they are also really the backbone of Danish economy today.
So that sounds like there's been great success in scaling up. But so what do these companies need to do to take the steps to grow and go global? Like you were saying that you have examples. What are the major challenges that they face and they have to overcome?
It's no secret that the corona crisis has been particularly tough to the SMEs linking of exporting. And we have therefore recently made a survey asking them what are the main obstacles for being successfully at the time being. And of course, reopening of business traveling is the top of their mind, not so surprisingly. But then secondly, they are mentioning removal of trade barriers that has arisen during the corona crisis as number two. But then the third point on the agenda is the strengthening access to capital through public streams. And here, of course, any financial institution like Nefco has a very important role to play, and I would say maybe a more important role than ever.
Thank you, Peter. And Peter will be with us as well once we watch our final video of this part of the day. And our next final video right now is going to be of a company called Baseload. Let's watch that.
The world's largest, but still quite unexplored renewable energy source is heat power. In 2019, the Swedish investment company Baseload Capital received a feasibility study grant from NOPEF, the Nordic Project Fund, to access the market opportunities in Taiwan, followed by a Nefco loan to accelerate the implementation of new heat power plants outside of the Nordic countries. Baseload Capital now has power companies operating in Japan, Taiwan, the US, and Iceland. By applying innovative financing structures and using subsidies to roll out local implications, Baseload Capital can help nations quickly transition away from fossil fuels and towards energy independence through geothermal heat power and by utilising industrial waste heat. The result will lead to more resilient societies and a planet in balance.
The story of Baseload started at Iceland, when we realized that new technology can totally disrupt the geothermal sector, moving it from single-risk, large-scale projects to scalable, small projects with distributed electricity. Heat power is an important part in driving the green transition by adding a renewable baseload power and also can supply heat. Already now, we know of 116 gigawatts potential where we could deploy our power plants. Nefco have been a great partner and their finance have supported us to attract additional capital and to invest in projects on a global scale.
And we have now with us Alexander Helling, CEO of Baseload Capital. Welcome, Alexander.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to join you.
You have extensive experience in international project finance and you are leading Baseload's strategy to go global. As we could see from the video, Baseload has found a way to capture renewable energy from sources that have not yet been utilized widely enough, both in geothermal energy and also in low temperature waste heat. There seems to be great potential to scale up such clean energy solutions on global markets. Which markets has Baseload already entered and where do you see the greatest potential for your company?
It's a good question. And, I must say that, geothermal has been around for thousands of years, right? And we got the idea to Baseload on Iceland, looking at the large scale power plants, realizing that new technologies can actually bring that one to much more scalable solutions. So, we learned from our neighbors on Iceland, building our first power plants and looking for, how can we scale this up on a global level? And, Japan, Taiwan, the west coast of the US, Indonesia, all over the world, you have a lot of these low temperature resources where we can go in, build power plants in a much faster a much more scalable way than was done before.
And so to reach growth targets, you of course also need the initial investments that we've been talking about today. Is it difficult to mobilize financing for this critical phase of your business expansion?
Well, I think in the early stages of a company, it's always difficult to locate the finance because you haven't proved the business model or done your first cases, right? I think we started very early, even before we actually started Baseload Capital as a company, to have discussions with Nopeth and Nefco on, how could we finance this company going forward. So, I think it's you always have to learn what players that you can have as advisors also when you plan for an opportunity or starting a company or when you are in the middle of it, and find the best alternatives on how to structure your funding.
And do you find that some target markets are more challenging than others in terms of getting funding to establish the operations?
Well, I would say that when it comes to green projects, there's a lot of funding available. What we have realized is that, if we're going to finance one specific project, it takes a lot of time to structure that. So we have done it in a little bit different way. We have worked with private investors, set up a green bond that we can utilize on a global basis, meaning that we can directly, as we identify a project, fund that, and that saves us up to 6 months to 1 year in structuring a financing deal. It's of course more expensive than if you would use local debt facilities in that specific country. But for us, it's extremely important that we can build up the power plants fast and also reach a cash flow earlier. So in our structure, we have secured that we have finance available for our projects, and then at a later stage, we can then refinance them locally.
And so what do you think other small and medium-sized businesses could learn from your experience?
No, but I think if you have a good green opportunity and business model, there will be a lot of different funding available. Everything from equity investors to government investors, like in Sweden you have Almi Invest Green Tech Fund, for example, but also on the debt side where you have everything from the bond market for larger projects. If you have the regular banks are getting more and more interested in joining early, and so on. So, I think it's more understanding the ecosystem that you can operate in the financial sector.
Thank you, Alexander. Now we'll invite back to the stage our other panelists. So Hannu, Trond, Peter, and Alexander will stay with us. And we have now some questions from the audience. So I will start with those, and please keep those questions coming by clicking that Q&A button. First question goes to Peter. How do you see the potential of circular economy in creating jobs and new business opportunities in Denmark and Nordic countries? What could be the areas of sustainable growth when increasing the recycling of material and finding new business models for reusing, recycling, regenerating? And the question comes from Juha Vallius.
Yes, thank you. Very good question. According to this plan that I mentioned before, that we have put together in Confederation of Danish Industry, it's a very comprehensive, ambitious plan, including 150 different initiatives. And actually, if that was implemented, we have estimated that the plan would create 120,000 new jobs in the private sector in Denmark. And of course, this is based on a strategy and a philosophy that all this innovation of new technology that the transition will create in Denmark, that will be cutting edge technology, which we will also be able to successfully export on the global markets, because export is driver for the economy in Denmark, and thereby also the driver for creating jobs.
So since we are at Nefco's anniversary event, I would like to ask all of you, Hannu, Peter and Alexander, what role do finance institutions like Nefco have for businesses like yours, or in Peter's case, is businesses that your organization represents? Hannu, let's start with you.
I think Nefco is a great idea. I think it's a good organization. It was very nice to work with Nefco. And of course, the principles of what Nefco has is good, absolutely good. A new strategy, what you say, you are ready to take risks, you are ready to look at the opportunities. So I think it becomes better and better. One challenge, I think, what you have is you need more money, more funding from our government. So it's a good organization, great professional team. Try to get more money.
We all need more money. I will let Trond comment on that in a moment. But Alexander, what about you? What kind of role has Nefco played for your company?
No, I think Nefco has been very important, and also as I said, as a financial advisor, not only discussing what Nefco could do, but also what other players in the market can do. And I think there's also a challenge in the Nordic countries, because there are a lot of different activities that many companies don't know about. So I would urge all the SMEs that are looking for funding also to reach out to Nefco, because they can also explain for you what not only what Nefco can do, but also what other players are doing. And I think that has been a great support for us.
And Peter?
Nefco has a really, really good reputation among Danish companies, and I guess it's also because a lot of the well-known larger financial institutions, they are mainly for the the big players, the big companies. But Nefco is really good at handling also the challenges that the small and medium-sized companies are facing. So I know many companies that have been working together with you and are very happy with the cooperation. And I also think that in the future it's going to be even more important that different financial institutions are being better at cooperation. At least that's what I can see more and more cases. That in a specific case, I can just mention the last one that I saw, which is a power plant investment in Africa. And that investment was only possible because there was several financial institutions working together, and therefore also were able to share the risk in that particular investment.
Okay, Trond, we have a few audience questions for you, but first of all, does Nefco need more money, and how are you going to get it?
I think we all need more money for green projects. I mean, in the Nordics, globally, we do. But as we also heard earlier, the money is there. There is no lack of money. But we need in Nefco to prove that the business model that we are proposing is really valid and works. We believe it does. We believe the financial sector can change, can take much more financial risk by going green. We believe the real risk is not going green, but ultimately, yes, the goal is to make Nefco, or the Nefco way of doing business, much, much bigger. And we are going to start looking and talking to capital markets and our governments as well to see how we can make Nefco much bigger, yes.
Excellent. So we have a few specific questions from the audience. Is the promotion of modern Nordic agro-business, including green dairy farming, still being supported by Nefco?
Yes, I would say that sustainable food production is an important area. So definitely, I can't comment on a specific project, but in general, food production is an important area for green projects. So it is.
And then we have another question for Trond. Do you coordinate your activities with Nordic Investment Bank and Nordic Development Fund?
Yes, indeed we do. We are three financial institutions, Nordic financial institutions, often called the Nordic Finance Group, located here in Helsinki. We are located in the same building. We cooperate a lot on all the infrastructure and systems we need to do our work. And sometimes our mandates overlap. We do have different mandates, but sometimes they overlap, and then we can even finance the same project. So that is possible.
So we already talked about that there is much money coming in, but so the pandemic, of course, has struck many companies hard, although the need for green solutions is greater than ever. I'd like to do a round with everyone. How should green recovery funding be used in order to create long-term positive impact? The EU funds are becoming available. How should we use them? Let's start with Alexander this time.
I think it's a good question, and I don't know if I have the best answer. I think from our perspective, we've been quite lucky being able to keep our businesses in all the different countries operational during COVID. But of course, what we want to see is additional funding going into to these projects, and if the recovery fund can support us with that, we would be very happy.
Han, what do you think?
It's a big money anyway coming in, and how you use that, it's a very critical question, of course. And the risk, what I see is that if the money will be spread out through the administrative organizations, so the risk might be too important for in the thinking, and opportunities could be much less thought. So the best way is to connect that money with the private money. I think it's quite widely used in developing countries, this kind of private-public financing. But in this case, because there will be a lot of money, I would combine the public money with the private money. The private money would look at the opportunities, and then the public money would just look at the risks.
And what do you think, Peter?
Well, I think that often I hear, that we need money to develop the projects. I mean, maybe the projects are there, but you have to define them so that they are able to come out and come in a public tender. Actually, very recently, the Danish Export Credit Agency, they have just established a small fund called the Green Accelerator, which is going to help good projects being finalized, being developed, so that they are able for investors to come in. So I think that is an area which needs more focus, because then you can get more projects, and when the projects are there, as Trond also mentioned before, then there's also investors ready to invest.
And what do you think, Trond?
Well, we have actually just launched a recovery fund, a green recovery fund, and the principles that we put in place is that it has to be very unbureaucratic, standardized, quick, easy to understand, very standardized, and we already see a huge interest in these type of small loans, and as Peter said, they have to come early. So I think from our side, if we see that the projects look good, we can provide such small loans very fast and quite early in the project cycle. So I agree to what everyone here said about it.
Okay, let's take a final round question with all of you. As innovators and business leaders, many of you have taken risks, but also concrete actions towards a greener and more sustainable future. So how can we encourage others, such as political decision makers, investors, financiers and companies, to do the same? How do we encourage especially politicians and investors to jump on board? Let's start this time with Peter.
It's a very good question. What I'm trying to promote a little bit here in Denmark is, that the development agency called Danita here in Denmark, that they should be more active, also in more commercial investments, where they should take make it possible to take some of the risk in the specific investments, which they are very reluctant of doing so far. But I think working together with the more commercial investors, that would make new projects, especially climate projects, more easy to get through. So that's I think that would be a really important initiative if that could succeed.
Alexander.
Yeah, I think it's easy, right? You want to do business and you want to do business in a good way, and we need to go from brown to green, reducing 51 billion tons of greenhouse gases to zero. So the only way for governments and funding institutions and bank is to jump on the train and go green. So that's I would say that if you don't do that, you will miss out for profitable opportunities and also playing an important role in this transition.
Han.
Yeah, I like what Trond said about the Nefco's new ideas, and it's very important that in the very beginning, when you have an idea, there is an entrepreneur having an idea, you need that kind of a small money quickly. Then the good institution, like as well about, I would say the governmental institutions, everything should look at the company and follow up the growth of the company. So it's very important that you get the next injection, let's say after 2 years, if the company is still alive and grows. So it needs 2 or 3 injections, which are like 10 times bigger each time, and to get that company to the level of let's say some tens of million in euros, if we talk about the euros, and then it starts to attract the private money, and then follow the private money, look at the opportunities, reduce the thinking of risk. When we talk about the green investments, it's absolutely necessary.
Trond, what do you think? How do we encourage this?
I think private investors and funders need to overcome the risk issue. They don't really dare. They have so much regulations and so many of their investors involved, but they want to. So I very much like the idea of combining public and private funds in some mechanisms. We could easily set them up where private capital is used, but maybe public money or public authorities could guarantee the first losses so that the private investors know that there will be some sort of risk-reducing measures in place. So combined, we need both private and we need governments to be involved. We need to overcome a trigger on this risk. We believe that we can invest and we can take risk, but not everybody believes that. So I think we need some triggers to get it all going.
Thank you everyone for your very valuable insights. We will show you a few more case videos at the end of this event, but now I have a distinct pleasure of inviting to the stage Kimmo Ohtonen. Kimmo is a photographer, a documentarist, a journalist, and he will help us take a look at the essentials of our ecosystems and planet. Kimmo, welcome, and would you tell us a little bit what are we going to see soon?
Thank you very much. Good to join you guys. Yes, so next we're gonna take a little trip across Finnish Lapland. We're gonna experience the beauty of it and meet some of the keystone species that live in our Nordic countries. And hopefully we're gonna promote this kind of ecosystem-based thinking as we are enjoying our journey.
What a beautiful and freezing midwinter morning. The forest around me is sleeping under a thick blanket of snow. And it's all very quiet around here. But we shall not let the silence fool us, because if we look closer, we'll soon notice that this place is in fact full of life. This forest around me is home to various extraordinary species that have adapted to not only survive, but to thrive in these Arctic conditions.
Soon enough, I come across a familiar pattern on the snow. This creature was one of the original inhabitants of this frozen land, when the last ice age came to an end, around 11,000 years ago. I decide to follow his tracks to see what he's been up to.
Oh, here we are. This is where the tracks lead. Last night, when you and I have been busy sleeping, this mountain hare has been busy feeding. As we can see, it's been using these birch twigs as its source of energy. And before it's moved on, it's left its signature mark saying, "I was here." It's amazing to think how perfectly adapted to this environment mountain hares are. Obviously they've got their white fur, but also their paws are proportionally big, and they function as a snowshoe if you like. So when they are fleeing from a predator, they can speed up to 60 kilometers an hour. So, sorry, but I don't think we're gonna see one today, because even with my snowshoes, my top speed is somewhere around 2-3 kilometers an hour at best. I might try, but I'm not gonna hold my breath.
Unlike mountain hare or red fox, which are more active during nighttime, many of the year-round inhabitants here are diurnal. This means they have to spend short winter days eating and getting enough energy under their belt in order to survive the long and dark nights.
Wow, so beautiful. Proper winter wonderland. I absolutely love this. Love being here. Love just getting lost in the woods and wandering about.
When at the end of a short winter day, the sun sets in the west, for many species, this means it's time to disappear. Most birds spend their night burrowed into a tree, but there is one Arctic species that has conjured up a rather inventive way of surviving through the long freezing night.
Oh, it's hard work. It's only afternoon, but it's already getting dark, and for willow crows, it means it's time to hide. This means that the bird literally digs itself into the snow, so red fox or other nocturnal predators can't reach it. And I thought I might just give it a go and see how quickly I can go and hide in the snow. Will I be as quick as willow crows? Let's give it a go. Oh, by the way, I forgot to say, it takes about a few seconds for the willow crows to be deep in the snow, so I've already taken about 10-15 seconds. This is not as easy as it looks. I'm starting to regret this. I give up. I think it's fair to say that I would have been killed by now by a fox or an owl or something. Oh God, ooh. I'm absolutely exhausted. Ooh.
Here in the northern parts of Finland, mountain hare and willow crows, which both change their camouflaging fur according to changing seasons, are doing fairly well. However, overall, as climate change has resulted in snowless winters, they are in trouble. If the current climate trends continue, the geographic range of these Arctic species will undoubtedly further diminish.
These kind of proper winters are getting more and more rare, even in our Nordic countries. Here in the northern part of Finland, this is quite typical in midwinter, but as we know, in southern part of country, it's a totally different ball game. And I really hope that our future generations will have winters like these. And we know it's all up to us. But this is what we are about to lose if we're not going to act now.
As a new day begins, a mighty predator appears in the sky, the golden eagle. With a wingspan of over 2 meters, a strong beak and razor-sharp nails, It is the most powerful bird that lives in the Arctic Lapland. The eagle spots his prey from afar, accelerates to full speed, and attacks suddenly from the sky, like a ghost.
Golden eagle is at the top of its food chain, and it plays a vital role in the whole ecosystem, maintaining a healthy balance between the species in the chain. This majestic yet elusive bird requires vast wilderness areas and is particularly vulnerable to human presence, especially when it's breeding.
Territory of golden eagles can span over 300 square kilometers. Therefore, around 90% of these predators, here and elsewhere in the Scandinavian region, live in the northern parts of the country, where the last remaining wilderness exists. Golden eagle, among many other species, from wolves to Siberian jay, is a poignant reminder of the conditions us humans have created on this planet. As we have expanded our territory to almost every corner of the globe, other species have had to make room and adapt. Many have disappeared.
Since the 1960s, we have lost over 60% of our wildlife. Perhaps now, the time has come for us to listen what nature has been trying to tell us. We can't take this for granted anymore. We now know that the well-being of ecosystems around us is directly linked to the well-being of us. After all, we are an inseparable part of nature. One way of helping out the species around us would be to reinstate their home environments. Yet, as I'm standing here in the middle of this beautiful forest, I am forced to wonder, what will our legacy to this planet be? What would you answer?
Thank you, Kimmo. What a wonderful video. So Trond, we're coming to the end of our event. We've had really interesting discussions. What are the key takeaways of the discussions for you from today?
It's been great. I think for me, the biggest takeaway is that we do need to take more risks with green projects. The real risk is actually not doing more green projects. We need more risk capital and we need more projects, and we need companies like Nefco and others to match the two. But to make that all bigger, many more projects with much more risk capital, I think the biggest takeaway was Hatla's words saying that we need to be 10 times bolder.
So if we have companies watching that are interested in Nefco's financing, or on the other hand, interested in investing in some of the companies or cases that Nefco has invested in, what would you advise to these viewers to do? Take action.
I would say that we have a great team here in Helsinki. We have staff waiting to take your calls. So please do get in touch. If you have projects, interesting green projects, and you want to scale up internationally, talk to my colleagues and they will tell you, is it possible, not possible? They will guide you, they might help you. To the big finance corporations, I would say, this is profitable. You want to be in on it, also call us.
Excellent. Those are the perfect closing words for us. Call us or Nefco. We will show you in a moment a few case videos more. If you can stay with us, please watch those. If not, you can find more case videos on Nefco's website. And for my part, I would really like to thank the audience and thank you for your questions. And of course, thank you to our speakers today. Have a lovely day, and we say goodbye from here in Helsinki.
Solar power is one of the fastest growing sources of new energy worldwide. The Norwegian company Norsk Solar, established in 2017, is a fast-growing solar energy company that develops, finances, constructs, and operates solar power plants in emerging markets. It currently provides over 200,000 households with renewable energy through its operating assets, equivalent to a saving of 2.8 tons of CO2 per year. Nefco approved a loan in 2019 to finance the construction of a 9-megawatt solar power plant in Ukraine, in the Kiev region. Today, Norsk Solar is currently constructing solar plants in Vietnam and developing projects in several markets across the globe.
Essentially, Norsk Solar has gone from a small business of 4 employees to a world-spanning organization as vertically integrated independent power producers, where we have activities and offices across Latin America, Asia, Europe, and Africa. For our first utility-scale project in Ukraine, Nefco was amazing at both providing guidance on local aspects, but also providing the debt finance. Solar is the cheapest form of electricity in a majority of the world. The project has been in operation since 2020 and is a success.
Over 70% of the water usage and 21% of the carbon footprint in Europe today comes from food production. And currently, some 30 to 50% of all food produced is wasted. The Icelandic company Thaw Ice Chilling Solutions has developed a unique cooling method to ensure that fresh products, such as poultry, fish, seafood, and meat, are effectively cooled throughout the processing stage, securing food safety, extending product shelf life, and eliminating harmful bacteria without using chemicals. Its patented ice gun cooling solution cools products by shooting ice slurry onto the carcasses as they move along the production line. Ice slurry has up to 80 times more cooling power than water, making it exceptionally effective for rapid cooling in factories. With grant financing from NOPEF, the Nordic project fund, Thaw Ice Chilling Solutions successfully entered the Russian market and established a subsidy in 2018. And last year, the company received Nefco loan financing to globally scale up its solution, reducing food waste, saving water, and saving energy resources.
Our ice gun chilling solution shoots slurry onto poultry, rapidly cooling it and reducing harmful bacteria. We reached the last few degrees that really matter for ensuring food safety. Nefco has provided us with important financing in the critical phase of startup to growth of our company. There are many challenges for innovative SMEs when it comes to strategic planning and financing, but there are 2 things that are absolutely certain. It will take more time and cost more money than originally planned. That is why Nefco's support is so valuable during the challenging times of expansion and growth for a small company. In the next few years, we will focus on increasing our marketing and sales effort as we plan to expand our solution into beef and pork processing, making sure that customers get the highest quality food products possible.